Now, before we pull in the bass guitar in the console and start to work on it, let's talk about a couple things that play into this. One big thing when you're working with a bass guitar is the room that you're mixing in. A lot of rooms have issues in the low frequencies where the actual room will resonate at particular frequencies. So you'll find yourself fighting this more than anything. Another thing that's especially important with bass guitar is working with the musician to get the tone that you need in the house. Now this is important with all instruments, but it's especially important with bass. You'll find that their pickup selection and their preamp settings on stage, if they have one, really affect the tone in the house. If they're not sending you much high frequencies from the bass guitar, you're going to have a hard time adding them on the EQ if they don't exist in the first place. So keep these two factors in mind as you're working on bass guitar. Alright, so the first thing I'll do working on bass guitar is set my level. Now to do this, I like to use the kick drum as a good reference. So we'll go ahead and pull in the kick and the snare while we're here. And then I'll gain the bass guitar up until it sits nice with the kick drum. Now I want the kick drum to start the note and the bass guitar to finish the note. So they sound like they're at a pretty good level relative to each other right here. So now we'll turn our kick and snare off. Now in headphones, this bass guitar actually sounds pretty good like it is. But I'll play with the EQ a little bit and show you what some of these frequencies do if you're having issues in your room. So let's grab our EQ and we'll go to the low frequencies first. If we add low frequencies, the bass gets really big on the bottom end. Now in some rooms this can cause big issues. The room will start to resonate and get really muddy. So if in general you just need less low frequencies, you can use the shelf and take some out. Now if you find yourself fighting a particular frequency, you can turn the shelf off and then make your cut. You might make your cue a little narrower and then sweep around until you find your problem frequency. Alright, so we don't really need to do too much with that, so we'll leave that alone. Let's talk about your low-mid frequencies. These can be a good thing or a bad thing, like most frequencies. So we'll add some and let you hear what that sounds like. So you hear too much of that, it's definitely a bad thing. To use a very technical term, it kind of sounds farty. But if we take all this away, the bass guitar is missing a little definition, kind of missing the note a little bit. So we'll take it back up and sweep around some. Alright, so let's go to our mid-highs. Around 2K, you'll find that you really get some nice pick noise or the finger noise on the strings. So we'll add a little bit of that. And this can be pleasant. It can add a little bit of clarity and just a nice sound of the bass guitar. But of course, if you get too much, it can get really annoying. And if your bass player makes a lot of fret noise when he's playing, you might find yourself taking some of this out. So if we take it out, you just have a really nice warm bass tone. You're missing some of the pick noise and the fret noise. You can also add a little growl sometimes, in those higher frequencies. Gives the bass a little bit of an edge to help it cut through. So again, you can either add or take away depending on what you need in your room and in your situation. Now the high frequencies on a bass guitar, there's not a whole lot up there. You'll get some fret noise, but other than that, there's really not that much there. So that's about all you're going to get, is just a little bit of fret noise, pick noise out of those high frequencies. So again, on bass, when you're EQing this, it can be a little frustrating because sometimes it's hard to pin down exactly what's missing or what's overbearing the bass tone, but it's really worth spending the time getting this EQ right because if you get the bass right, it really helps everything else in the mix to fall into place quite nicely. Makes a nice foundation for everything. So definitely spend the time finding those frequencies that are offending or that are missing. And again, work with your bass player in his pickup settings, because they can really affect the tone a lot with those settings. And help explain that, maybe it sounds great in his ears, but you're struggling in the house. So to have a good compromise and explain that you want him to sound good. He wants to sound good. So just let him know that you're on the same page. You both want him to sound good. Now let's talk about compressing bass guitar. Pull up a compressor here. Turn it on. First thing I'll do is go ahead and set my ratio. 3:1 is usually a really good starting place on bass guitar for compression. And then your attack and release really depend on what you're going for. There are two different approaches. If you have a bass player who's maybe a little sloppy and maybe inconsistent in his playing, meaning that his notes are not always the same volume, you might want to go with a fast attack, and then a release around 250 milliseconds where we're at is a good place. This will help smooth out his playing a bit. It'll take out those loud parts while leaving the quieter ones alone. Now the second approach is to have a slower attack time and the release time around the same, if not a little faster. And what this does is adds a little punch to the bass. So if you're trying to get that initial hit of the note to maybe stick through a little bit more, you would do a slower attack and a little faster release. This would let that initial hit sneak through, and then it would compress and then let go. So in this case, we'll take our attack all the way fast to kind of smooth him out a little bit. Not really looking for any more punch. So I'll take the attack all the way fast, and then we'll lower our threshold down. So you kind of hear that the notes sustain a little more evenly. Now we'll also want to turn up our output gain, because if you watch, we're almost always compressing at least a few dB. So we'll turn this up 3 or 4 dB to make up for that. Now I'll let you hear before. Now you hear the initial hit of the note is definitely louder than the sustain of the note. And if I turn the compressor on, kind of helps us out a little bit. And if you want to get more aggressive, you can take your ratio up. You can also lower your threshold a little bit if you need to. Now if I slow my attack down, it will let some of that initial punch of the note come through. So now you hear the little punches back. And that's compressing a bass guitar. Now, once I'm done EQing and compressing my guitar, I'll check it with a kick again and see how it sits. I'm going to make sure that you can still hear the kick drum and those bass frequencies aren't interfering too much. And you also want to listen for the idea that the kick drum is starting the note and the bass guitar is finishing the note. And that sounds pretty good.